So, hello all. I don't see Rajdeep over here.
Okay, Rajdeep called me. He's on his way back home. So
Oh, okay.
once he is home, he connected and then he dropped off. He told once I reach home, I'll join back. So yeah, he'll be in
Okay.
a moment. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll leave his part then. I actually had a response to one of his queries on the first day. And Bakau, yesterday we had a discussion wherein you asked that in case if anything was available in HCI to test the mappings and also run a test on the iFlow itself so that we can see how the message is getting processed at each and every step.
Correct.
So today in the SAP TechEd, I got a chance to have a one-on-one with one of the SAP product owners. And he told me that this is the plan for at least the mapping testing. They would be providing some kind of a resolution in 16.11 release on HCI, or max by the latest of February next year. So that is 1702.
That's good. That really helped a lot, you know.
Yep, absolutely. So I exclaimed the same thing to him that the only issue that we have currently is that we need to upload the iFlow all the way to web UI, and then only we can test the mapping. We don't know how to display the queue, and there are no functionalities as of now. So he told that is in the pipeline, and the SAP team is currently working on that, and it should be available. So I just thought that I'll take.
That's really an awesome news, Aditya.
Yeah, that's really good. It's a very, very good one. Very good news.
Sure. So this was something which I found out today. And one more thing I just wanted to clarify, that it was my bad that I mentioned that the HCI system would be known as HCPPI. Instead, it would be known as HCPIS, which is HANA Cloud Platform Integration Services. So that got clarified.
Why is that SAP, you know, they seem to have a lot of this thing about nomenclature, just changing names almost every 6 months.
That's because they own it, Bakal. That's their baby. So
yeah.
That's true. And Bagav, I do agree. I asked him the same question, that HCI itself is such a good acronym for something which we are using for a cloud integration tool. But they told that many of the people, they misunderstand that HCI is directly operating out of the HANA database. But that is not the case. So the HANA Cloud Database, on top of that, there's a layer of HCP, HANA Cloud Platform, which is the HCP cockpit. And they are just trying to integrate the HCI into the HANA Cloud cockpit, HANA Cloud Platform cockpit. So currently they just have the authorization or user creation and user assignments into that space. But later on, they would be integrating a lot more functionalities of HCI into that. And hence, they wanted to rename it to HCPIS. So that would be one of the cases that would come across. I had a discussion with Chad as well on this, and it seems that he already had a discussion with the SAP team.
Okay.
And there was just one query for Rajdeep, which I got clarified today. So anyway, I'll just wait for him to call. And once he logs in, then maybe we can just take that up.
So I see Chad in. So hey, welcome Chad. Good afternoon.
Okay, I think while we're trying to wait for the other guys to join, Aditya, I think one other thing that's been a clog in the wheel of, the adoption of, HCI for most of the guys from PI background is this lack of test environment, lack of a test bed where people can, practice, where people can, people that are just, someone like me who's a rookie, so to say, trying to get my hands dirty and all that, it's always almost practically, impossible for you to do any test scenarios, if you don't have access to tenant environment. We raised this repeatedly with SAP, but it seems all our pleas have fallen on deaf ears. So I don't know if you still can help us push, where we can, practice test scenarios,
Yep, absolutely, because so that is one of the things that we would be discussing. And you are being too modest in calling yourself a rookie in PI space. So I would ignore that part. But apart from that, I believe that yes, in HCI, we do have a lot of different functionalities, even though it doesn't give us the space to test the iFlow or get the, how do I say, the payload at each and every step. But still, the most critical steps, like for example, just after the script or else just after and before the mappings, these kind of places, how we can effectively debug the payload or else at least get to know what the payload looks like. And thus we can deduce the logic that the mapping or the script might be following. So those kind of things we will definitely discuss today. So the agenda for today, according to me, is I would definitely like to cover the monitoring, apart from the traces, but at least the monitoring part of HCI, and also the, I'm sorry, and also the creation of UDFs and other details. So we would be covering the business scenarios as we might have encountered so far in HCI. Otherwise, any of the business scenarios that I may think of, which can be relevant to our scenario. And we would try to test it using the same web service that we tested yesterday.
Okay.
So that is the plan as of today. And traces is something that we can maybe have a verbal discussion as of now, because today also I had a discussion with the SAP guys. And the product owner that I was mentioning about, he told me that the tracing functionality would soon be extended onto the customers. But the thing is that many of the customers or the developers on the customers end, they tend to forget to switch it off. So that is the reason, as I exclaimed earlier, that it takes a toll on the database because of the huge size of the payloads that it stores at each and every step. So they do not provide this kind of a functionality as of now. But later on, as more and more admin access would move onto the customer from SAP, this is one of the roadmaps that they have for this functionality.
So by extension, the basis guys are still in business.
Yeah, I would like to think so, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just open the HCI part. Sorry. So yesterday we talked about having Bakao, by any chance, or anyone in the meeting, do you have the payload that I sent yesterday? Could you please help me with the payload and the link?
Okay, just one moment.
Yeah, sure. And meantime, I'll just open the Google Chrome and we can try it with this. Otherwise, I'll log into a different machine for testing it. So,
okay, so
we'll
I'm
try
just going to copy.
Yeah.
Do you have it?
Yeah, it's there. So just give me a moment. I'll quickly try and execute this. Okay, I'll copy it fully. So I'll just copy it onto a notepad so that, sorry. on. And still it doesn't work with this. And that's a bummer. No, it doesn't work with this. So anyway, yesterday we tested this web service and it gave a response correctly to our query. So it did give us a response with the content from content modifier and also from the script like we wrote yesterday, wherein it gives you a part of the response which says that the below has been added by script. So it was working absolutely fine. So this is the way that we have the use cases for script and content modifier. Now, the question I wanted to throw in this particular meeting before we start testing any of these web services is there any particular business scenario that you would like me to add to this? Let's say a conditional routing or any of the other shapes that we might have seen? Anyone? Deepa?
Yeah, could you do some filter based on employee status and
Okay.
No, I'm not sure. Do we have a payload, that can match that?
no standard employee status?
Yeah, I'm saying that the payload, the source payload, do we have any? Anyway, I'm sure Aditya will figure that out. Okay, I was thinking if you could do some kind of service call, that will equally be helpful. Just to enrich.
Or you show me one of the payload, I can give this one.
I'll try and search based on the things we have here already, and I don't think so we have anything.
Do you want me to send a small, just a very simple payload across?
Sure.
Okay.
So meanwhile, I'll just, till the time we do that, I'll just go on to the message monitoring part, and I would search for the messages that have completed on this. So I'll take sample. Oops. Sorry about that.
So Aditya, you tell me there's usually, whenever we define, select, standard parameter within the query, we always mention that needs to be included. Is there a way we mention, not to include something not in?
Absolutely. So in the definition of the externalized parameters, we can always go ahead and mention that, mention the country codes not in, or something like exclude country, something like that. So you can have that as well. I mean, it is up to us how we build the query in HCI. So,
But normally I think it's not a recommended practice to include a negative query.
Well, that depends actually on the use cases. So like we have had scenarios, as I mentioned earlier, that let's take an example of having a hybrid solution, wherein let's take the example of POIT, for example. You have practices in different geographical locations. So you want the Asia Pacific to go live with SuccessFactors, but at the same time, the US company codes are not going live with SuccessFactors. So the data still lies in the master data source, basically, is in the SAP HCM system, for example. And you would like to run the file from SuccessFactors to a third-party system only for the country codes XYZ. So either you can include them, and usually it is the negative test scenario wherein you have 90% of the locations into SuccessFactors, but you wish to exclude a certain set of locations. So like if you want to exclude the US and North America and South America regions, for example. So in that case, you would absolutely mention just the country codes that you wish to exclude from selection. So it doesn't take a toll on the database, because as good as the select query, the include select query, it works absolutely fine with the exclude select query as well. In fact, in many of the cases, I've seen that it is better on performance whenever we try and exclude the company codes, the company territory codes I'm talking about. So those are the kind of cases wherein you have a hybrid scenario and people would like to exclude a few set of country codes from being selected into the file whenever you are sending it to a third-party system. So
Yeah, and the other question talking about performance, Aditya, there is always a myth, I don't know if it is proven or not, but there's always a myth which says, SF API when used, it's lower than OData. Is it true, realistically?
well, Deepa, I would have to say that it is a fact, in fact, that the SF API is lower on performance, because technically speaking, it creates a SOAP payload, and it also is a web service kind of a call. Whereas the OData query, it is directly a URL call, though the functionality inside would be same, but the response times that we have seen from SuccessFactors itself, they differ for the same set of users if you use an SF API or else if you use an OData.
Okay, now let me just ask you one more question then, Aditya. So basically, the SF API, when we use it, assume we have a lot of portlets that are in scope. Assume for an interface like anything with payroll interface, maybe ADP GV or any payroll interface, we may use all the information that's almost like 80% of the information available in SuccessFactors, right? So in this scenario, it has to be too many calls when it comes to OData. You think the performance would still be better than SF API in this scenario?
Now that is a case wherein compound employee is not available on OData.
That's correct.
So what happens is, in that case, because compound employee is available in SF API, though it takes close to 18,000 milliseconds, I've seen cases for that. So, but still calling OData queries multiple times, that actually doesn't aid into performance. So that is the reason we go ahead with SF API only in cases with compound employee. But whenever you have...
so what you're suggesting is, it all depends upon the data in scope. So basically, if the data scope is, almost everything in EC or close to everything in EC or multiple portlets, it's still suggested to go to SF API. Is this what you're concluding?
Absolutely. And also in case, let's say, for example, if you're querying for a delta. So in compound employee, the best part is that they give you a filter based on last _ modified _ on, which is the last modified on date. Now, let's take a typical use case of querying the users which have their information changed for job information, for example, or job, comp, employment. These are the three informations that we are interested in.
Okay.
So you can even try and query the user API. You have a navigational field of employment type nav. So you can expand it. You can leverage a filter on the employment type nav last modified on. And then under employment type nav, you have job type nav or job info nav. I'm not sure of the name.
So this user is what you're talking about, employee profile, not...
Yes, exactly. Employee
okay,
profile.
but
So
employee profile will still not be sufficient, Aditya, because the replication. I mean, functionally, what
No, no.
happens is employee
Exactly.
profile doesn't take everything within these modules. I
I
mean,
do
this in this
understand,
book.
Deepa. So that is what I'm coming to. You have the navigational fields which link the user profile or the employee profile onto their employment and the job
Oh,
info,
got you. Okay.
and even person and personal informations for that matter, because they are
Mm-hmm.
all linked through the user ID.
Okay.
So you can have multiple filters on that, but a better way of, instead of keeping all those filters onto the navigational fields, a better approach would be to go ahead with SF API and simply query
Yeah,
the
and also reason being that user API would be a lookup because it's only the user ID.
absolutely.
Okay,
So
got you.
it just gets the other APIs based on the lookup within success factors itself.
Mm-hmm.
But it's better if we make use of compound employee in those kind of cases. So the SAP team has told that they are planning on creating compound employee onto OData as well. But
Mm-hmm.
the best feature about compound employee is that it returns the historical data as well, until and
Exactly.
unless you are using a snapshot date.
Mm-hmm.
So if it returns the historical and the future effective dated records,
Mm-hmm.
so many of the like the payroll systems or many of the other third-party payroll systems are also interested in these kind of changes.
Great.
So having moving the functionality of compound employee onto OData may not suffice all these needs. So that is the reason they are still struggling on uh, being decisive on what kind of functionalities should compound employee in OData provide.
Okay.
Because if
I
you
think it
see
is also good, what we did with Temasek is like, we may not need the entire compound employee queried. We can still filter out with the segments and then fields and all that. So
absolutely,
better.
absolutely. I mean, that
Okay.
is even better.
Okay.
So in these kind of, like, for example, for Temasek, the use case is that you need to have the employee information from different port lists, like you mentioned. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, going with OData would take a lot of toll on performance. So it's
Great.
always better to go ahead with SF API. So that even, as you mentioned correctly, that it depends upon the use case of the data that you require at the end of your iFlow.
Yeah, got it. Thanks, Aditya.
Sure. Okay. So I would just like to cover the monitoring part till the time that we have the testing figured out on this sample one training. So the view over here that I have on my screen shared currently, this is when I double click on the tenant name, which is E2010, it opens up the tab which I discussed yesterday, wherein you have three tabs as message monitoring, the deployed artifacts, and the data store viewer. So when you click on message monitoring, it gives you a status of all the messages, whether they have failed or completed, until unless you have filtered based on the status. If you are selecting all the statuses, it will give you all the failed and the completed messages for that particular iFlow. So it is, I mean, this is the way how the message processing log looks like. It gives you all the necessary details for that particular iFlow, like the context name. The ID is anyway not required for us from a debugging perspective. It gives you whether there was an intermediate error in the iFlow. When I say intermediate error, it means, let's say, for example, you are using a parallel multicast, wherein you are passing the same message across multiple branches, or the same payload across multiple branches to get an output differently from each and every branch. So one branch may end up in error, but it still continues on executing the other branches. And in that case, the intermediate error could be true, though the process would be in a failed status, but there would be, let's say, in case if there were a total of 5 branches, the second one was failed, but the third, fourth, and fifth, they would still be executed. So that is why the term as intermediate error, in case if any error was encountered within the iFlow. Now, this also gives us one of the other use cases from a debugging perspective. There may be cases wherein we receive an error in an OData upsert. Like it says at the last error, it says that there was an error. There was an error while upserting the data. There was a server exception, and the server returned a processing code HTTP error 500. So that means that it was an internal server error. When you try and trace the errors down, eventually you will find out that the error occurred in one of the mappings wherein the target payload was generated without a user ID, for example. That went ahead and the same information was tried to be upserted into user API, for example, and that returned an error code as 500 stating that the user ID could not be blank or something like that. So just deducing the error based on the last error is not recommended. I'm not sure whether SAP is coming up with an approach to handle these kind of things, but as of now, the last error is not the actual error that you may have in an iFlow. So that is the bottom line of debugging. So what we usually do in these kind of cases is we just scroll through the message processing log. So you can just click on this drop down that you have near the save button. You can click on filter leading spaces. It just remove all the leading spaces before it. And you can just scroll down through the message processing log, or otherwise you can search for the keyword error. So it gives you the different statuses, and the error field would be, the error keyword would be found at multiple places. Now, in this case, it was a very straightforward thing. So you may not have multiple places, but things like, okay, it has the processing log terminated, I believe. It will have that. Yeah. So it says the rest of the MPL is trimmed to the first 100 elements only because it was a huge message processing log payload. But usually what happens is when you try and search for the keyword error, it gives you multiple places wherein the error might have occurred. So being the developer of the iFlow, you need to understand that which was the first step in line wherein the error might have occurred, which might have caused the last error to occur. So you need to find out the first place of occurrence of that error. So in this case, it gives us a very clear description that the error was in one of the scripts. It says the script, though it is not descriptive enough, that there is an unexpected token at line 691 and column 1. So we can directly go on to the script, which is this one, and you can go at the line 691 and column 1. In cases wherein the MPL is not truncated after the first 100 elements, it gives you the exact name of the script which caused the error.
So now, Aditya, I'm just curious a bit here. So these errors, does it tell you, whether it is a data error or is it something to do with message mapping or with the script? I mean, I see, with script, it gives you specific error on the line and everything. But I'm more concerned about, if it is a data error and if there is a fail status, how would you identify whether it's a data error, and how would you go track the data down? That's something that's been so challenging. I've seen that everywhere, be it Dell Boomi or PI or HCI.
Yep. Actually, Deepa, it doesn't tell you whether it is a data error or a technical error.
Okay.
So the only way that you can deduce that thing is that where the error occurred. For example, the example I showed earlier, it very clearly stated that there was a syntax error in the scripting file.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells us that it was a technical error by far. But when in cases like, for example, the upsert failed,
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, we'll have to see that what was the data that was sent to the upsert operation, and whether the data was incorrect, or was our mapping incorrect, or was there a scripting step which was trying to manipulate the data that went wrong.
Okay.
So that depends upon the team who was responsible of analyzing these errors.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think the other thing I can chip in there is, I mean, Deepa, just to kind of, address what you've said, everything boils down to the internal, message format that is running within, the ESB environment, be it PI or HCI or what. I don't know about them. I know the internal message format is XML. Okay. It's XML, and the two major, how will I put it now, characteristics of features, that you look at when it comes to XML as to the correctness of data is, what we call the well-formedness and validated, okay? An XML payload may be coming in, with an incorrect data, but it's still well-formed, okay? Or it may be well-formed, but may not be valid, depending on whether you are comparing that message against a schema. So in effect, it's always going to be extremely difficult to narrow down to precisely which point in the data that you're having issues with, or which part of the data is causing problems, unless you are in total control of the program. Okay. So if, for instance, you grab the payload, you're comparing it against the schema, it might tell you, oh, this thing is well formed, but it's not valid. It's not valid. Maybe where you're supposed to put an integer, you're putting a string. We're supposed to put a string, you're putting a float or something. That's if you're comparing that XML payload against some schema. Okay. But in effect, where you're supposed to put a string and you're putting an integer, it doesn't mean that XML itself or that payload itself is wrong. It's still well formed to some extent, but it's not valid. So all of that boils down to the internal programs running, but unfortunately we're not in control of what is happening internally. So that's why it's always going to be a bit difficult, unless maybe some beautiful, engine, comes up in the future.
Okay.
That's just my own contribution.
Thanks, Bakao. So Aditya, I just have one last question. I don't want to divert you too much from here. See, basically when it comes to error and exception handling, correct? So the one thing, that I can think of is, if there is no value maintained in success factors, we can make that pass, and, we can make it not to fail within the program. That's possible, I know. That's a general error handling scenario or exception handling scenario that we can manage. But most of the clients, I worked with, what they do is, say for example, if one record due to data error fails, the entire batch or the entire interface fails. They don't want that to happen, and instead give an error of only that specific record. Now I understand the challenges to identify which record causes that issue. There's no way, what I'm understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, there is no way that we can identify which record specifically caused this issue, by the standard delivered HCI. But if I had to do that, just eliminate the one that caused the error and process the rest, and do not fail in any error scenario, any data error scenario. Is there something that we can generalize and solution in?
Absolutely, Deepa. So we, in 99% of the cases, we do that. In case if you have a file with 100 records, if the fifth record has a data error, let's say, for example, I have a username coming in the file, which is username is widely accepted within the organization as the identity of an employee. But in success factors, we have user ID, which is hidden, which is abstracted basically to the front end. So we try and get the user ID from the username. So let's say, for example, in a file, somebody generated a username which does not exist in success factors as of now. Maybe the employee has not been replicated onto success factors, or maybe the employee is inactive in success factors. So in those kind of cases, we do get the requirement. Please notify that
Yeah,
record.
that's the point, Aditya, that I was making. So when we have an error handling requirement to handle it in a specific way, it is feasible to implement. But my question is, there is no error handling requirement, and a client does not know what error may come up with data.
Mhm.
So
Well,
basically they say, do not fail any error, just pass it on, exclude that record and pass it on. I mean,
Yeah, Deepa, I think you remember we had this. Oh, Aditya, you want to respond to that, or I should just be keeping my own thoughts?
please go ahead, Bakao.
Okay, I think we've had this discussion time and time again.
I know, Bakao,
But
we are quite aligned, but I was just
of
curious
course.
if you had something to say.
Yeah, but I don't think this issue you have raised is a very valid concern, from business and functional perspectives. Okay, but technically, most of the ESB engines out there, okay, the design of those engines is such that once one fails, everything fails. That's one intrinsic property of most ESB engine out there. They don't want a situation whereby you allow some records to go through, okay, even though a few records may be having issues. You allow some records to go through, hoping that the downstream engine or the downstream system will process and do some maybe callback to say, oh, so this one failed, you can go and fix them, data and all that. It causes a problem at the end of the day. What if you assume that the downstream system will fix will process those ones that are okay, then flag those ones that are wrong, then you expect maybe the sender to fix them. It causes a lot of problems at the end of the day, managing and monitoring what happens. Basically, the operation is supposed to be atomic.
No, yeah, I understand, Baka. Usually, when such requirement comes, I usually tell them, if you continue to do this over a period of time, the two systems are going to be out of sync. And that's a bigger problem to deal with. We completely understand. But in spite of that, we continuously get a requirement. For example, Temasek, within PYT itself.
Yeah,
So
sure.
we used to get these requirements on error handling. So basically what I asked them is, please give us the error scenario, like the username, for example, which Aditya quoted. So if we have specific scenario, I understand we can implement this. But I was just curious to see if HCI is able to do something, just to exclude errors. But if you do not have a way to identify what the data error is without looking into the XML, I don't think this is possible. That makes sense.
Yeah, but I think another thing I will quickly say as well is, for one of my previous experiences of projects is there's this concept of ECH, error and conflict handling in SAP ECC, especially if you are doing a PROSI, receiving system, where you push the messages across to ECC, okay. As long as there are synchronous messages, what ECC does, it can process those ones that are okay, but those ones that are, having issues, it will flag them such that maybe the processor on the other side can log on and trigger this post-processing office. It's actually a T code in ECC. That can show you all those ones that are having issues. You can now fix them right there at the receiving side, or you cancel them such that they could be processed all over again. Okay, so I think some of those you have some of those mitigants out there to actually go around the challenges. But maybe other people can share their experiences. But I know that feature is there for ABAP server-side process. If you're doing error and conflict handling, it's ECH to actually address such issues. When some record will pass, the remaining can be processed by the receiving system. Either fix the error at the receiving side, or you flag them back to the sender to fix, and you reprocess all over again.
Okay.
So
Aditya, you were saying something.
Coming to your question, in case if you would like to just ignore the record, you don't care about the sync of the source and the target system.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we are processing the records one by one. So usually in the splitter, as I mentioned, we have a checkbox as stop on exception. So in case if there was any error with one of the records, if you uncheck this stop on exception, it will just ignore that particular record and it will proceed with the rest of them.
Okay, will it give me a list of records that's been ignored?
No, that is the case. I mean, it won't give you a list of the records, but yeah, in case if you do not want to notify it,
Aditya, that means that this error is not going to be fixed at all.
absolutely. So that is the case. I mean, if you are talking about, we don't care about the source and the target to be in sync, and we are not sure about any of the error messages that may happen, then this is the only way that we can go ahead and do it. Otherwise,
Aditya, you can take it back. I think this is a very, very valid concern in the market now. You know, I mean, Deepa has been raising this, you know, over and over again. I think we can take it back to SAP. If there's just any way, you know, they could help us to incorporate this feature so that we know those who are.
Yeah, there is one of the other ways of dealing to it, which leads back to the same. How do I say the same thing that we talked about yesterday, wherein we had that infinite loop kind of a scenario. So we can have an exception subprocess which catches the error as soon as it occurs. It identifies the record, and we can write some kind of a logic to get the records in line. Let's say there are 100, the 5th record failed. Let's get the 6th till 100. Store it in a data store and give the main process a call again. So the execution is rerouted to the main process, maybe through a web service call, because there's no way that you can call main integration process. So you can give a call to a sub-process, you can create a sub-process, you can give a call to it from 6th record onwards, and the error record that you have, you can always store it in a data store and you can notify it at the end of the process. So that also could be one of the cases. I mean, that was suggested by me in one of the scenarios, but anyway, it didn't get passed. So
yeah, because I see a high risk of performance on, you know, if this interface as dependent in it, if this is a lot of, you know, how do I say? If any other interface is dependent on this interface, the timely run is very crucial. You know, it has to either.
Deepa, I don't think so. It will take a toll on the performance because anyway, if the exception occurs, your interface is failing anyway. So it is a better way that you just handle the exception in the best possible scenario.
Okay, what you're saying is the interface would still fail, but we would get to know where the error is.
No, it won't fail. We will prevent it from failing, and instead we would re-trigger this scenario again. But the only issue is that it is as good as the exception process should be meant to handle the data the way that the main process should be handling it, basically. Because currently we do not have any try-catch kind of a statement in the main process. So anytime the first exception occurs, the control goes into the exception subprocess. We take the...
and is there a way to report whatever gets into this exception subprocess and send out a mail notification saying, you know, this...
Yeah, we can do that. We can collect it. We can send it across in a consolidated report, or else if you would require, you can notify it as an individual record, that this is the record which caused an exception. So the records before this have been processed correctly, and the records after this have not been processed at all. So that is something that we can definitely build up, but it is not a valid business scenario in a way. I mean, being a technical and a functional consultant, we are capable enough to identify the errors that may occur. The exception subprocess is used in the scenarios. Let's say, for example, you're trying to call the success factors system from the HCI landscape, but all of a sudden the proxy between the HCI and the success factors failed for some unknown reason. Maybe the network went down on your success factors data center, and it returned a response as service not available, or 400 service bad request, or service not found, anything like that. So exception subprocess is meant to handle those kind of errors. But apart from that, if you have any validation or any kind of errors that are bound to fail, you and me, I mean, as a functional and technical consultants, should be aware of that. until unless you are a novice in this area. So that is I mean, I have never had a case wherein any kind of requirement as such came in. The only kind of requirements that we receive are that all of a sudden, abruptly, if the system fails and you receive an exception, then what will you do in those kind of cases?
Okay, that's so more towards the system failure or connectivity. And so
absolutely. Because apart from that, if you know a particular scenario in an upsert will fail. For example, I'll give you a very valid scenario. You have positions in success factors. You have a position. You also have a parent position. So many of the people, they do not understand the business case that a parent position, let's say the start date on the current position is 1st of January 1900, and the parent position has a start date of 1st of January 2016.
It will not work.
Absolutely. It will never work.
Correct.
But many of the people fail to understand that. They just think that, well, the parent position is valid as of today, and the child position which we are trying to upsert is valid as of today. Then why is this particular relationship failing? But that cannot be deemed as one of the cases wherein you should catch that kind of an error in an exception sub-process. Because it is a valid, very valid business scenario that it has to fail. So somebody from the functional or the technical end should be able to understand that why this particular thing is failing in success factors. So that is why I mentioned that there has never been a scenario of this kind. But if there is, yes, definitely there would be ways to handle it. And as I mentioned earlier,
provided we have the detailed scenario in place.
Absolutely. And plus HCI, as I mentioned earlier, it provides you the whole functionality of Java. You can write a Java code, you can create a package inside it. You can do n number of things. There are unlimited possibilities on what kind of scenarios you can handle. Even on a field level, there can be n number of checks that you can do. So these kind of things are still feasible. And if you would like to report the failures and would like to only process the successful records, just ignore the errors and process the rest of the records while notifying the failures that as they occur, those kind of scenarios are also feasible. But as of now, it is a bit into the gray area wherein we have to develop the solution on our own. It is not provided by SAP as of now. We do not have any kind of a try-catch situation over here.
All right. I got you, Aditya. Thank you so much.
Sure. So that terms for a very valid business scenario. Anything else that you might have that you wish to discuss? Because, I mean, I can show you the different functionalities, but that doesn't change the description that I gave for the past 2 days. I mean, I can show them in action, but if there is anything in particular that you would like to know, it would be a bit meaningful to implement it over here rather than me just...
Okay, Aditya, maybe this I've discussed with my colleague Srikant. I'm not sure whether he's on this call, which is, it seems to us that the focus of the sender system is from the cloud. Okay. SuccessFactors, Salesforce, and, Ariba and the rest of them, if we flip it, say from ECC back to the cloud, I mean, have you had any practical experience in that regard? Is this something that that we should look at? Say data flowing from ECC as a source or as a sender down back to the cloud as the receiver. Do you have any thoughts in that regard?
Well, I mean, we have had
anything. It could be ECC as a source. It could be some SFTP sender. It could be just about anything, But,
absolutely, because we have a very widely used case for this, wherein the cost centers, as I mentioned, are usually in your SAP finance system or any of the other finance systems. The cost center source data is on your on-premise, and you try to replicate it to SuccessFactors. So there is also a standard iFlow available for that. And also we have had cases wherein we are trying to upsert from getting the data from on-premise and sending it across to SuccessFactors for that matter as a cloud application.
Okay, and the adapter is going to be SOAP, right, for ECC?
Absolutely. It is a SOAP adapter because many of the places we do not have the VPN connectivity onto HCI or onto Boomi for that matter. So we can either make use of a cloud atom in that case, a local atom in case of Boomi, or else in case of HCI, we can make use of HANA Cloud Connector, or else we can directly call a web service. Like for example, in the standard scenario, if I were to mention, it is a SOAP sender, so it is a web service call. But at the same time, I'm sorry, the IDOC is sent to an HTTP port. In 2021, you configure it. So the IDOC, it is, I think, ODTF_CCTR is the basic IDOC type, or the message type, I'm sorry, of the IDOC. ODTF_CCTR. It is configured in a way wherein in W21, you send it to an HTTP port, and that HTTP port calls an RFC destination, which gives a call to the SOAP connector that you have.
Interesting.
So that SOAP connector receives the IDOC. It transforms it according to the transformations that you might have defined in your process, or since it is the standard, so SAP might have defined in their process, and that upserts the cost centers into your SuccessFactors system, which have usually being the secondary source of information. We usually do not give any kind of modification authorizations onto the cost center data, or we do not encourage the users to modify the cost center data, and we directly assign the employees onto the cost centers over there.
Wow, that's a very, very, that's a scenario that I would love to, because I mean, Srikant and I, we talked about this extensively on Monday. We're just looking at the other side. I think it's something that I don't know whether it's on this call. It's not. So, but that's interesting. But what about BPM? Anything on BPM here? Can we do any BPM stuff?
BPM.
Like we have it in PI. I don't know what you call it in Boomi, environment, but in PI, PO environment, while we're doing PI, we're doing CCBPM, but for the it's more of a BPM thing now. Is this something that we can implement here?
Well, I'm not sure on the terminology BPM in HCI.
Okay, that's fine. That's fair enough. I think we can take that offline so that we won't unnecessarily bog down the other participants. We can take that offline.
So, in case if you would like to have different business processes integrated using HCI, I would say that workflow could be one of the possible examples, wherein we had a request recently.
Okay.
Let's say you have a third-party leave management system, like, how would I say, Kronos. Kronos is one of the systems which has the leave functionalities. So somebody applies a leave in Kronos, an email is sent to the manager. So we can integrate that kind of a functionality using HCI. I am working on a proof of concept on that in Boomi as of now. So an email would be sent to a mailbox, which is monitored, which is a common mailbox, so as to say. And we read the emails from there. We have a script which parses the email content, and it takes the leave request ID. And there is an API in SuccessFactors, which is emp WF request, which is the employee workflow request. So you just pass the details into that, and it gives you the leave ID over there. And you can upsert in SuccessFactors, or else, for example, if somebody has applied for leave, and in case if it is not reflected in SuccessFactors. Otherwise, if we take other case scenario wherein the employee has applied for a leave in SuccessFactors, you can have the approval automatically automatically approved after a certain period of time using this kind of a functionality. So I believe that would classify as BPM.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely spot on. That's exactly what I was looking at. All these stop, all these stop, act, request with events being triggered left, right, and center. That's what we
Absolutely.
do,
So
with the BPM in PI environment. So I think the scenario you have raised is a valid BPM scenario.
Yeah.
Aditya,
So
I'm just curious,
yes,
were you successful about proxying in through an API?
Proxying is not possible, Deepa. So what we did was, instead of assigning the first level of approval to a manager, we assigned it to a group ID.
Okay.
Wherein the group ID consisted of the manager, as well as always we'll have a common user as the HCI user. So that HCI user can also approve the requests on behalf of the manager. So I wasn't able to proxy on it, but we tried it in a different process altogether.
Okay.
We created a generic ID. I'm not sure what the term was that they used, but it was an ID which was assigned to a permission group, which had the permissions to approve the workflows. And it consisted of the manager ID and the user ID. Both were included over there. It was in the RBP section. I'm not
it's
sure
a role. Got you. Okay.
Yep. So that way we were able to succeed with that. And there was a proof of concept which we did. So that part was approved. The only thing that was left was that how to read the email and parse the content to get the request ID of the leave, as well as because you need to approve the exact leave that the employee has applied for. So that was something that I'm currently working on, and it has not been finalized yet. But yes, I mean, it is technically feasible. So I've given them an estimate of 5 days.
That's incredible.
To approve, to implement that. And in Boomi, it's fairly very simple because you can have mail as the sender channel. I'm not sure whether it is a case in HCI as well. I've never tried it. But in Boomi, there were a lot of use cases, and many of the you cannot have it over here. So many of the customers had asked us for this kind of a functionality to be built in.
Okay.
This for the sender, right? This for the sender channel, right? The sender adapter.
Yep.
Okay.
So we cannot have an email from a sender adapter.
I think the platform is still, it will grow, and we'll be able to fulfill almost all the cases out there.
Absolutely, Bakam. So that was one of the use cases wherein what we did was that there was an email was getting generated out of Boomi to the manager of the employee. And the manager's email ID was procured from the employee profile. And we send an email wherein the context, there was an icon in the email itself which says approve, and there was another icon which was reject. And we used to create a subject. Based on the subject, we will be, that is still in process. So we will parse the subject and we'll see whether it is approve or reject, the first keyword before the colon. And based on that, if it is approve or reject, we just identify the status of the leave request. And then we parse the body to get the leave request ID, which is automatically populated while Boomi has already sent the email to the manager. Okay. As soon as they click on the link, they have a defined set of body parameters, and it specifically says in the body stating that please enter your comments below this line. So whatever comments they add, we would be absorting that with the leave approval or rejection request.
That's interesting. Yeah, but I think for PI environment, PIPO, you can fairly handle that, with the BPM functionalities, interaction with workflow systems, interaction with other third-party systems. You can fairly do that, with the BPM, BPM, BRM, functionalities available in PI. But it's okay. I think this platform will eventually, merge the functionalities in Boomi and PI and PO. and we have everything in one place.
Absolutely, Bakav.
Yeah.
Even I agree that it would be. So I don't see that we have Rajdeep as of now. Okay. Now, apart from that, I'll just quickly scroll on to the topics that we have. So importing content from SAP PI, that is one of the topics that I wanted to touch in this meeting. Importing the content from PI, we can only import the ESR content, first of all. And in the ESR also, we have only the limitations to the mapping and the XSDs. Because there is no concept of integration, interface mapping in HCI. So we do not have that kind of a mapping that we can import. We can only import the mapping of any kind of mapping that you might have defined with all these different use cases. The UDFs, however, you'll have to create it from scratch in HCI and re-import the UDFs within the mapping. So that is one of the constraints that we have in HCI. But it has its own limitations, like WSDL was not supported till Q1 or Q2 release, I'm not sure of this year. So WSDL import was not supported. Only the XSD types and the mapping types were supported as of now. I'm not sure of the current situation, but these are the limitations that we have whenever we are importing the content from SAP PI from our on-premise system.
Okay, you mean external definitions, right? With WSDL?
XDEF and WSDL, yes.
Okay.
We cannot import both
Aditya, I have one more question. So
Yes,
how
please.
about, importing from multiple source system? I mean, is there a way to process multiple source system or sources? Say, for example, success factors and a file, a report, and merge it for an output.
Absolutely, Deepa. We can do that for sure.
And
I mean,
multiple source systems like, success factors and Chronos together.
Absolutely. It is possible. We have use cases for a third-party payroll system wherein you are having EC payroll in your landscape, but not all employees' payroll is running on that particular thing. So like I mentioned that I was in the project for Timken implementation, wherein we had this kind of a scenario wherein only the US employees were live on the EC payroll, but the payroll data of the global population was there in the EC payroll system. So we used to take data from info types, we used to take data from Employee Central and combine them and send it for the Asia Pacific regions onto their own payroll providers.
Okay.
So that was one of the use cases. Otherwise, the other use cases could be wherein I have had scenarios in one of the projects that I was working with, the Kellogg's project. We had, if you know, in success factors, there is an API for bank.
Correct.
But it is by default not visible to the API landscape. Because it is a very sensitive information and it is usually not provided to the API. Even for read-only also, it is not available. It is marked as not visible. Until unless you have a strong business case, you can raise a ticket to success factors and they can provision it for your landscape only. So in those kind of cases, what we had was that the customer used to upload a client bank file and we used to have the employees. So we used to match the routing key numbers and get the bank details for that particular employee and pass it on to a payroll system. So again, we are fetching from multiple sources.
The reason I'm asking this question, Aditya, sometimes, I'm more specific about lookups, So most of the interfaces, what happens is, right, the APIs sometimes just gives in the code and sometimes, the description is not coming in the API. So we go read a specific foundation object or an MDF object to get a description and any further detail about that object. So
Yeah.
it's multiple processes. Sometimes what happens is, the data within these objects are too many. So if you look at the way it processes the lookups and everything, it's pretty much time consuming, and also it also depends on number of objects that we use. So what I basically wanted to check is, do you think, reporting these objects into one place and reading these reports while lookups, is it a good solution? What are your thoughts basically on that?
Well, Deepa, that depends upon the kind of data that you're looking for. From your example, I do understand that it might be a foundation data that you're trying to look up, or else pick list, for example.
Yeah, let's take job code for example, and I have over 8,000 job codes within SuccessFactors.
Okay, so now let's say your employee file or the employee data file, whichever is coming as the source data, it has only delta. So it doesn't make any sense to read all the 8,000 plus job
Correct.
codes from
Understood.
SuccessFactors. So in that case, the design would be that we would like to individually query for each and every employee.
Correct.
But in case if there are full files, so in those kind of cases, what we do is usually tend to do is that fetch all the information from SuccessFactors and then try and create a lookup using a script that we have done in one of the Temasek implementations.
Yeah, that's right.
We are querying the foundation objects all at once because we know that it will always be a full file. So it's better that we always...
No, I'm asking in a scenario where, Aditya, we have 2 or 3 interfaces and it's all about, same pattern. And, we don't want to query within the script. Instead, we have it in some SFTP folder generated every day and we just go look up that.
No, I do understand, Deepa, but eventually you need to get the data even from the SFTP folder into your process.
Correct.
So it is as good as if you're querying it from
within the
SFTP
script.
or else, yes, if you're querying it from SFTP or else you're querying it from SuccessFactors. It doesn't matter to the integration flow.
Yeah, so in that case, script is better because you always get the current data and you don't miss on any data. That's a good point.
But script would be inevitable in both the scenarios. So you'll be using the script even if you're looking up from a file, or else you'll be using a script even if you're looking up from SuccessFactors. Because whenever you have a call going out to an external system, it will get all the data into the iFlow. But finding the link between the current data with the lookup data, that is something that you need to handle logically within the script.
Okay.
So a script is inevitable in both the scenarios, but it only depends upon that what is the use case. So like I mentioned that if you have now I cannot compare SuccessFactors connection with SFTP connection because that depends upon various things, and these two are, I'm not sure how you can compare the performance on these two. But I would like to still, from an integration point of view, I would always like to query the source of truth, which is SuccessFactors in this case, because I may not rely on this SFTP data. For example, if somebody, let's say you create a file at 8 a.m. every day EST. But what if just at 8:01 somebody went ahead and changed?
Yeah, I understand that. Get it.
So in that kind of case, I would like to have the real-time data in the system in my iFlow at least. So in those kind of cases, we definitely go ahead with this. But if you're having a file for master data, like I mentioned, one of the use cases when we had the bank key. So that we know that nobody will go ahead and change the bank key, at least the bank routing numbers with the bank information. Nobody would definitely go ahead and change it in the SuccessFactors system unless there was an instruction received from the bank itself that we have changed our routing number. So we make the changes in SuccessFactors. At the same time, if we know that we are generating a file for one of the interfaces to use, so we'll go ahead and change the file as well.
Okay. And what is the best encryption process recommended in HCI? We were
Well, as
talking
of
about
now,
bank information. So is
yeah, as of now, we make use of PGP encryption, which is safe enough. And okay, encryption, you're saying when we are communicating with different systems?
That's correct.
Yep. So in case of files, we use PGP encryption. Otherwise, we always go ahead with the HTTPS security. So we have the transport level security and also the security on the message. The message is encrypted and it is sent to the target system.
So basically something like database to database update, right? So in those kind of a scenario where it's not actually producing a file, but it just JDBS update or something like that.
But I think I will chip in, there that the security you have to consider it at 2 layers. Are you looking at the security within the HCI?
No, I'm talking about the encryption during transit.
During transit, of course, you have so many algorithms out there. It depends on what's been set up. Out there, to carry. I mean, as mentioned, SSL. That's HTTP over secure. Layer. That's the most prevalent, data security algorithm that you can apply, to protect the data in transit. Okay, but most often, you can always have those esoteric, algorithms out there that will be implemented, whether it's certificate based or wherever.
So basically, Bakau, sorry, I'm very ignorant here. So during this JDBS encryption process, right, what is that I need to check with the client from the infrastructure perspective? What certification or license or whatever?
Are you talking about JDBC?
JDBC update, sorry, yeah.
Okay. Can you repeat the question again?
Well, just 1 minute, please. I'm sorry to interrupt. But Deepa, sorry to be a spoiler, but JDBC as of now is not available in HCI.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not sure whether they have included it right now. I will just quickly.
It's not available. It's not.
I don't think so. It is available in HCI.
Oh,
so as of now, it is not available. And usually, Deepa, in these kind of cases, wherever you have JDBC updates, usually in most of the cases, clients will not expose their JDBC database basically to any of the calls over the internet. So it has to be routed through some secure channel. Let it be an SAP web dispatcher or HANA Cloud Connector. These are two mechanisms that HCI supports.
No, my question is, do they need to have any special licensing or any infrastructure level requirement before even, we start taking this requirement to check, with the client saying, do they have all this ready for us to get this implemented, or is it something ready for?
For this, it is not required. I don't think so. Any special licensing is required. Because as soon as we procure HCI, they provision us with HANA Cloud Connector, which is a small installation package that you install. So it creates kind of like a very secure channel between your HCI and your on-premise server. And then from there, the request is routed onto now that it has reached the client landscape, it can be routed onto any of the systems. Let it be JDBC or SAP or
it's unlike PGP.
PGP is an encryption format wherein the data that you are transmitting over the channel is encrypted.
Yeah, so usually what we do, Aditya, I ask for the certificate details and, some other information around PGP for us to lock and for them to
But for
unlock.
JDBC, that would not be required. Let's say going down the line, if you have... let's say going down the line, if they even get a JDBC connector, it has to somehow reach that landscape of client or else of any third-party provider to be able to observe in the database. So that connectivity from cloud, that is HCI, to the client's landscape, that has to be very secure. Apart from that, whatever is happening inside the client landscape, it can be like, how do I say, a very naked message, like very without any kind of encryptions, because it doesn't matter. It is within the client landscape, so they can easily transmit the messages as long as they are not doing it over the internet. But anyway, they'll have to handle the kind of encryptions and the security that they have within their landscape.
Okay.
But as far as HCI is concerned, usually whenever we are interacting with the client landscapes or client networks, we usually tend to make use of HANA Cloud Connector.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay, Aditya, I think we're almost dropped into the time now, but I'll quickly take you back to the discussion you were having with Deepa prior to this GDPC thing. I thought that already took us towards some performance mechanism that are available to us during implementation of the iFlows. And one thing that I wanted to actually validate is from you is I remember during the Temasek implementation, so many ideas came forth, and I was proposing that, okay, say for instance, if you are doing some kind of a service call, a request reply call, for some data, and you mentioned that from the script you make the call, is there any possibility for us to store the response in some kind of a cache, okay? Such that when we're executing subsequent steps, subsequent shapes, in the flow, we can query that cache, rather than making those calls, repeatedly to the source of truth. That's the sender system. Okay. So, do you know of any mechanism, or we just store it in the body, in the body of the message in the script, using some property that we can retrieve anywhere along the execution chain, and get the data that we want. That's the first one. You just validate that. Then when Deepa was mentioning source system, my mind went to you having multiple sender systems. I don't know whether that's what Deepa was trying to say. You having multiple sender systems, and as far as I know, I'm not sure that's a possibility. I know there's always going to be a source system, a single sender system that will initiate, the execution. Okay, then along the line, you can have different, downstream system that could be called to enrich the message, to enrich the payload, and along the line. But not that you have three systems acting as the sender. I'll be surprised if that's available in HCI.
So Bakao, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, you need to have just one trigger point.
Okay, correct.
It may be a source sender system, or it may be a timer event.
Okay, correct.
So, but you can have multiple sender systems for sure, because you can have the information procured from multiple sender systems, but at the same time, you are procuring the information. They are not pushing it onto you. So that is the difference that we need to understand.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay.
Because we are basically procuring the information. We are not trying to trigger the iFlow based on that sender system.
Okay, but there's always going to be a trigger. One trigger. Either event or some timer. But you can pull data from different systems.
Absolutely.
Deepa, I don't know whether that's actually that aligns with the question you were trying to ask.
Yes, Bakao, thanks for clarifying.
Okay.
I remembered you telling me, there cannot be multiple sender channels. I'm sorry, I didn't use the right terminology. In one of the assignments that we worked in the past, I don't know, somewhere.
Yeah.
Mentioned. Okay, thanks, Bakao.
Then the cache, you want to respond to that. I mean, when you're pulling the data from those systems, can you can store them temporarily in the object, in the script, right?
Okay,
I'm sorry, Bakao.
Bakao, this is Raidu here.
Okay.
We need to ask questions which is relevant here, and if it is related to any of the projects, I want you to take offline. Okay, so let's utilize the time of Aditya for the HCI training, because everybody is there. I don't want you guys to work through the projects if you have any. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so would it be like, okay, let me just go through the agenda. So we have covered the SAP PI and its limitations. We have covered monitoring as well. We know how to monitor in HCI. Creating an iFlow is done. Creating a message mapping. Okay, I can walk you through that. Configuring sender receiver is okay. And success factors, SQL editors, and authentication setup. Okay, so let's cover up the details on the sender configuration. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the sender configuration based on the sender authentication method based on two of the scenarios, wherein we can have certificate-based authentication. You can browse through the certificates that you might have downloaded from any of the needs that you may have, and you can upload it into HCI, and the sender would be authenticated based on this certificate. Otherwise, you can always keep it as role-based authentication, wherein you can have the user ID and password as the authentication mechanism. Then coming on to message mapping. Message mapping usually requires some kind of an XSD as the source and an XSD as the target. So it is based on the same principles as PI. We do not have any notable differences as of now. The only thing is that the Java mapping, which is supported in PI, can be deemed as a script mapping in HCI. So any kind of Java code that you write in a Java mapping in PI can be entered as a Groovy or a JavaScript in HCI, and you can make use of that mapping to pass through the data. All you need to do is we need to know the mechanisms on how to parse the XML or the string body that is coming in, and then we can parse the body based on our requirements. Like in this case, I'm just parsing the body which is coming in. I'm not passing through it basically. I'm just trying to enhance it with some of the elements of my own. So these are also very valid use cases wherein, for example, if you're trying to look up the pick list values for any kind of fields, and there can be multiple fields in the source data. So instead of setting it up as a property in content modifier, you can even try to create a root node, put the body, and over here you can put in the property. Not property, but exactly the body that is coming in from request reply. Something like the pick list. So these things we can do. And later on as the next step, you can maybe parse it within this script itself. Otherwise, you can parse it in another script if you'd like. Then we had the splitter, join, gather, and gateway. Gateway is nothing but the router. We had them discussed earlier. And I'm not sure. So just a question for the attendees. In case if you are okay, then should I go ahead and walk you through one of the iFlows? And Raidu, please let me know if it is okay if I walk them through the LMS user data iFlow. I'm not sure whether I can do that in this forum or not. So,
yeah, I think you can briefly walk through, Aditya.
Okay, thanks, Raidu. So, if everyone is okay, I would like to walk you through this iFlow on what were the requirements and how we approached towards gaining a solution on this. In case if you have any questions regarding any of the other topics that we discussed, please feel free to stop me in between and ask me questions that why we didn't utilize those kind of methods over here. Okay. So this is how a typical success factors iFlow looks like. There have been more complex iFlows that I have worked with. This is one of a very, how do I say, it would be a very widely used scenario which we have covered in this particular iFlow. So the idea here is that we are querying the employees from success factors. We are replacing a few of the values, like trying to get the descriptions for foundation and generic objects, and also try to get the descriptions of the pick lists inside, kind of like enriching the content that we are receiving from success factors. Then we gather them, and then we create a file, a CSV file out of them, and we write it to a data store for our reference purposes, or else you can create an SFTP file out of it. So the first basic step that we need to look, and we discussed earlier, was that how the sender is being authenticated. So in this case, it is a certificate-based authentication because it is a success factors system. And we are querying the success factors system based on the user ID and password, but we have the relevant certificates installed into our HCI tenant to ensure that the HTTPS connection is maintained when we are trying to query the details from success factors system. So this is how a query looks like. Maybe this is one thing that I missed on walking you through with. So whenever we have, I would talk in terms of success factors only in this case, because many of the different channels have their own different configurations. Like HTTP, it would require a URL which you are trying to get or post to. And in success factors, it is a bit different because this is an adapter which takes care of the authentication as well as it maintains the session. So if you know the basic call flow of success factors, it works in 3 different steps, or 4 different steps rather. The first one is that you log in. The second is that you query. The third is that you check whether the session is currently valid, in case if there are multiple records still left to be fetched. Then the fourth one is that you query more. So there are different API calls within the SF API for this kind of a query, wherein you log in, you query compound employee, then you check whether it is a valid session, and the query itself returns you with a query more parameter. So when you query the first time, it has a node which says query has more, and it is either set to true or false. If it is set to true, the connector is smart enough to query the success factors system again to get, and it says query more, and it gives an ID which is provided in the response on the first line. So it queries all the records that you have that meet the selection criteria. Usually an SF API login call is valid up till 24 to 26 hours. So I've seen in terms of milliseconds, it is close to 268,000, that is 268,000 seconds. And it is close to 24 to 26 hours, until unless you instantaneously break the connection from success factors, like when your iFlow has completed the execution, or else you send another login request, which usually is never the case whenever we are having multiple SF API calls within our landscape. So the adapter is smart enough to check whether a session is valid. So the first thing it does in any of the subsequent calls is to check whether the session which has been initiated by the first query is still valid or not. If it is valid, then it will continue with the same session. Let's say for some reason, in case if your success factor system has behaved abnormally, then it gives you an error stating that SF API underscore session underscore invalid. That is the error code that we receive from success factors. And thus we know that we are doing something wrong within the iFlow, and maybe the queries are not in sync with each other. So that happens a lot of times when we are trying to integrate with PI system. That is one of the cases, because sometimes it returns different session codes or multiple session codes per se. And when we query using the first session code, it throws an invalid SF API session error. So the primary things that we need to fill in the success factors adapter is that you need to browse and select the success factors adapter. You select the transport protocol, which is always defaulted to HTTP. Then you have the message protocol as either SOAP. Oh, that's strange. You have the message protocol as SOAP, or I'm not sure why is it not showing up. Okay, since this is a sender channel, it can have only SOAP or REST. But otherwise, if you have any kind of success factors connector within your request reply shapes, it gives you different options. Maybe I can try to show it over here. So it gives you different options like SOAP, OData version 2, REST, and OData version 4. So OData version 4 is currently a beta version that has been released to a few of the customers which are making use of HCI. But as of now, it hasn't been released not as of now, but as of 1605, I believe it has not been released to most of the customers. So it depends upon the data center that you're using, whether it gives you the capability of querying using OData version 4 or OData version 2. But the primary message protocols that we select are SOAP and OData v2 based on your requirement. So if you are querying any of the OData APIs, you'll have to select OData v2. Otherwise, if you are querying from SF API, you need to select SOAP protocol. Once you have selected any of the protocols, you need to go to the adapter specific details, wherein it asks you for the address of your data center or the API address, as we say it. So the API address is usually based on the data center that you're using. Mostly, wherever you have HCM, you replace it with API. Otherwise, in case if you have something like performancemanager.successfactors.com, you replace it with api.successfactors.com. So performance manager usually gets replaced by API. For example, if you are having a sales demo instance that you are working with, so sales demo instances usually have api.salesdemo.successfactors.com. So that is the nomenclature. This is usually provided to the subscribing clients. So your customer will definitely have the information about the address of the API URL that you wish to query. Once this has been done, we provide the address suffix based on whether the call is to OData. We provide it as OData version v2 or v4 based on your data center. Otherwise, you provide it as SF API. Sorry, soap.sfapi. soap/sfapi/v1 or v2 based on the version that you might have selected. So in this case, for example, if I select SOAP, automatically you'll see that it has been changed. Okay, it is SFAPI v1 SOAP. And after that, you provide the credential name, which you might have used for creating the success factors credential. Maybe I can walk you through that process as well. So in the interim, I'll just show you how to deploy a success factors credential. So you just click on deploy. Once you move on to deployed artifacts under your tenant, you select the kind of credentials that you wish to deploy. So as I mentioned that we also have success factors credential specifically created for the success factors adapter. So you can select the user credentials, click on next, and on the type, you can select whether it is default credential or is it a success factors type. So you can enter anything like and provide a user, for example, SF API admin, and provide the password as, let's say, test1. And when you click next on this, it will ask you for a company ID because the type is SuccessFactors. So SuccessFactors credential always requires the company ID against which you wish to authenticate. So in this case, for example, you have SFSF credentials dev, and you can see that we have the HCI user. And here the company ID is Temasek Cap D2. So once you have deployed the credentials, you can resume your OData channel configuration, OData or SF API based on your need. Since the adapter type is SuccessFactors, always ensure that we have the credential type as SuccessFactors as well. Then you can have the call type. It can be either synchronous or asynchronous. I am not sure of any of the use cases for asynchronous queries, because whenever we are using the information from SuccessFactors inside an iFlow, we would always like it to be synchronous query, because we would like it to be, we would like the results to be returned as soon as we give a call, or rather than, rather than not waiting for that call to complete, we would like to wait for that call to complete so that we have the results and we can parse them in the iFlow as required. Then the operation details, usually whenever you have a new query created, it usually has the operation details as blank. So you click on the model operation, which allows you to model the operation based on your needs. So you can enter the API URL over here. Provide the company ID. Once you have entered the details, in case if you're having any kind of a proxy communication, if provided by SAP, because the SuccessFactors, the HCI cloud is with SAP. So in case if they have any kind of a proxy communication enabled, you need to check this box and create, supply the host and port for the proxy communication. Otherwise, just click on next. Oh, my bad. Selected a wrong channel. So as soon as you try and get the details for the model operation, a query is passed on to your SuccessFactors system. I'll just quickly log into SuccessFactors. So now we have a list of all the entities available in the OData version 2. These are the entities that you can see in the OData data dictionary as well. So all these entities are available over there. And as I mentioned, that once you query, so in the OData API audit log, you can see the last query to be the metadata query from SuccessFactors, which the HCI system is trying to query.
Aditya, sorry to interrupt.
Yes, right.
Deepa, and Bakav and everybody. I don't see any questions since last 15 minutes. Okay. Okay. My intent was not to ask questions, bombard with questions. Okay. Don't worry about that, but I don't want to discuss more in-depth technical stuff. So because of other people, we have other people on the board also. So Bakav, Deepa, okay, please ask questions.
Okay, boss, we are here.
Don't worry, Raido. I already have my next question in my mind. I'm just waiting for it.
And also the same goes for the poet team as well.
Yep. I don't see that Rajdeep has joined, and
I
everybody
don't
else
know.
seems
Yeah.
to be pretty quiet on the questions part, actually.
Yeah, he told me he'll join, but I don't see him. I pinged him as well. So
That's okay.
yeah.
Okay. So continuing on with this. So as I mentioned, that as soon as we try and model an operation in HCI, since we are trying to connect to the company ID which of success factors, under the API audit logs, you can see that there is a call made to the metadata for the OData. So it tries to get the metadata. Metadata is nothing but the data about data. So it gets the definition of all the entities that are available in OData. So once you select any of the entities, you can select the sub-levels over here. Now, currently the sub-levels available in HCI are only up till 1, but in OData entity, you can have sub-levels up till 7. 7 are supported in Boomi. And in success factors, I've drilled down till 4th level. So when I say sub-levels, it is as good as when we were talking about the navigational fields. So like, for example, if you have the user entity and you wish to drill down till the job information, so that is on the 3rd level, or rather 2nd level, because the 1st level is employment information from the user. And then under employment, you have a job information, which is the 2nd level that we have. So as of now, we have sub-levels. So you can select the sub-levels in case if you need any of the navigational fields. Otherwise, you can keep the sub-levels as 0. And you can just select the entity, click on next. And based on the operation that you wish to perform in the entity, usually we go ahead with upsert or get. These are the only 2 operations that we deal with as of now. And once you click on query, you can select the fields that you wish to query from success factors. Let's say all these should be fine. I'll just select the user ID as well, user ID and username. And once you have selected the fields or checked the fields that you wish to select from success factors, you can click on next, and it gives you the filter configuration. So you can filter based on the fields which are available over here. Otherwise, you can always, you do have an option of modifying the filter, which we'll talk about later. So we have, let's say, for example, user ID equals to one of the properties, which is user underscore ID. I'll click on add. So it automatically formats the syntax, like user ID equals $property.user ID. Like we discussed earlier, that the properties are referred with this particular syntax in HCI. You can click on finish, and it creates everything over here. So these supported operations, they are available in the help documentation of SAP. So you can have supported operations like, okay, I see there. So we do have supported operations like you can club the filter criteria into conditions. For example, you can have something like, you can put a start bracket, then put in user ID equals property user ID, or user ID equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Club these 2, And also we can do something like and username equals Aditya. So these kind of operations are possible, and there may be a lot of scenarios which are not possible through the model operation that we just saw, the set of pop-up screens that we saw, but you definitely have an option of making changes directly into the operation details, like I did over here. So even if I save it right here, there won't be any kind of a syntax error as long as my syntax according to the SFQL, which is the SuccessFactors query language, is correct. So if there are any known errors which are not supported by SFQL, it will throw an error. Otherwise, it is supported in all the scenarios. Any questions on this model operation part? On the query part, possibly?
I think question is if you want to test the the workability that or the correctness of this query, we can always use either the SOAP-UI or
absolutely,
Postman, right? Because that's
yes.
very important.
We can use Postman, or else we can use Advanced REST Client, or else SOAP-UI, whichever is the preferred tool of choice. But yes, we can definitely verify the correctness of this query. And yeah.
I think the other thing for me is if I look at the address suffix, here they're saying OData, v2. Okay, so by the time you click the model operations, automatically it looks at, it combines the address with the address suffix to know that what you're trying to do is not SFAPI, what you're trying to do is OData.
Well, when you click on model operation, it just checks that under the general tab, what is the message protocol that you have entered?
That you have specified. Okay, so that means the changing the address suffix here is
absolutely. So if you change the address suffix to be SFAPI/v1/, then this would definitely give us an error, like we received one.
Okay.
There
you
go. So
okay.
So these kind of model operations are possible, and I'm sorry, you can directly go ahead and mention the operation details, because as of now, the model operation in HCI does not support the grouping operators like the brackets and the and or conditions. So it doesn't support that as of now, but we can edit them directly in the operation details.
Okay. But we must test them to be sure that they're actually correct.
Absolutely. So you must ensure that these are correct. Otherwise, it usually throws an error in HCI iFlow itself. It says unable to tokenize the query string. So it throws you an error in case if there is any weird kind of the syntax is not correct, for example. Like if somebody instead of or uses the pipe separator, and in case of and uses the ampersand, so it will say that unable to tokenize the query string, unknown token found at position X, and it will show you this symbol.
Yeah, that's
it
good.
gives you that kind of an error. Okay. So this was one of the parts that I forgot to cover, but anyway, we have covered it in this particular session. So moving on, we have the scenario, as I explained, that we are querying the employee data, and we are trying to enrich the data by supplementing the descriptions from the foundation, generic, and the pick list values. So here the first point is what we do is we just get the details from SuccessFactors or from the compound employee entity, And in order to reduce the payload size so that the overhead on the iFlow is not much, we quickly map only the required fields that are required in the target file, or for the lookups for that matter, to be passed on to the target. And most of the fields under the segments are just left out blank, so that whatever is the payload which is going down the line, it is much less in comparison to the payload which was fetched from compound employee. Then there is an option in Boomi which I didn't find in HCI, is that you can remove the namespaces, or remove the XML namespaces which are coming in from SuccessFactors. This was one of the options that I couldn't find in HCI, but it usually aids in wherever you have XML conditions or any of the mappings that you might have created the XSDs manually for. So in those kind of cases, you may not know that what is the kind of namespace which is coming in from SuccessFactors, because based on the data centers, it may differ. Based on the release version, it may differ. Though I haven't seen much of differences, but still it may, because the namespaces are bound to change based on the changes in the entity level. So the second step that we do after the mapping is that we just remove the namespaces from the payload. And then we go ahead and store the payload into a content modifier, because we wish to make further calls onto different objects from whose data we are trying to enrich the current data that we are receiving from compound employee. So as we discussed earlier, we would be storing all these data into a property, and then we would be utilizing a script to look up the values. So we make multiple calls to the SuccessFactors system. First of all, trying to query the pick list, then the foundation and generic objects, something like the location. Okay. And then we have the business unit, company, and cost center. Then we have the department, the division, and the job grade, which is a custom or a generic object that we have in SuccessFactors. Once all of these have been queried, we just create the body again. So at the last content modifier, as I mentioned, that in the body, whatever is the value that you mentioned, that would be the body going down the line after that particular content modifier shape. So here we mention the P source, which is nothing but the compound employee body that we stored in the content modifier over here, the one that I'm hovering my mouse over. So that same body is supplied back to the iFlow, and all the other SuccessFactors fetches have been stored into individual properties as of now. Now we move on into the script. So for this script to work, we had to have a few of the custom jar files implemented. So as I mentioned, we have the SAX and the JDOM jar files that we primarily use. This is my way of scripting. There can be other ways based on the person developing the script. So here I tend to get I parse the data over here in line number 47 till 52. I get the body from the current message, and then I build the XML document for it. And then I go ahead and query. Okay, so here what we are trying to do is we are just trying to loop on the job information of the employees, basically. All the compound employee nodes are coming inside the script because we haven't split it based on any of the person. So then we get the child location, and I get the body of P location, which is the location entity or the FO location entities payload that we have received from SuccessFactors. We just query that from the property. We build an XML document out of it, and we loop at the external code. Once the external code matches the current location text, we just supplement the value with the name of the location. So we create a new element, and we add that new element to the incoming compound employee payload as the new element name is location name. So that is the primary function of the script. We do the same function for the cost center, the department, the division, the company, and the business unit, all of these. So once the data has been supplemented, we just go ahead and delete all the properties that we had set in our previous runs, because we do not want this overhead to be carried forward to the next shapes, because now the function of these bodies have been completed. So we just delete them from the properties. All these bodies would be freed. Once they have been done, we just go ahead and split the message, the compound employee message, based on individual person, because the rest of the calls that we are making are very user specific. And if we are querying all these APIs, irrespective of whatever is the user, like querying all the values currently in the SuccessFactors system, it may result in a negative performance aspect, because we may have unnecessary information being queried from SuccessFactors system, which is not even relevant to any of the users that we are running the interface for. So that is the reason we just split on the person. Once we have split it on the person, we just, again, I mean, now it is the same flow that we did before without splitting the person. So we store the body under p_source splitted, and we store the person ID external of the person to be used in the further queries. So then we go ahead and query the user API. We query the certificate, background certificates. We query the work permits of the user. We query the education of the user. And we apply a similar script over here as well, which looks up at, if you remember, we haven't looked up any of the pick list values as of now. So it looks up the pick list values, as you can see over here. And it also looks up the certificate and the work permit information, which is required for the output. Once that has been done, we just go ahead and delete all these as well. Okay, somehow the shape has gone corrupted in HCI. So it doesn't show that they have been deleted over here. So we just delete all these values in the next content modifier. Okay, there it is. So we just delete all these values. And then we move on to the mapping step, wherein in the mapping step, this is how a typical mapping looks like. This was the point that we wanted to discuss as a part of the agenda. So we have the source XSD, which can be queried from the path over here. So you can click on add and click on the XSD that you wish to add in the mapping. And similarly, you can specify the target element over here. Once you click on definition, it gives you the graphical mapping of all the elements that you have over here. So you can just click on any one of these. You can see that it has different parameters. You can drag this. It is as good as the PI mapping that we have. And even in Boomi, it is more or less on the same lines. So we have the person ID going in with map with default function, and then passing it onto the student ID that we have. And we can also, as I mentioned earlier, that we can have custom functions created. So once you right click on custom functions, you can either add a custom function which you have already created a script for, or else you can right click and create a custom function. So once you create on it, click on create, I'm sorry, it gives you, this is the format of custom function. Okay, so you can define any kind of processing like string val1 is equal to arg1 plus this is a test, and arg1 is equal to, or else I'll just return this. So I'll just return the val1. So it returns a string back to the mapping, and it requires an argument as arg1. So whatever is the value, I'm just adding another text to it, like this is a text, this is a test, and that will be sent back onto the calling function. So one of the examples that we already have in this is getting the property value that we might have set in one of the scripts. So like here we have one of the, not here. Yep, there we have it. So here this get property is one of the scripts that has been created. And if I see it in the source, let me just show you how it looks like. So here you have it. Get property is the name of the function. So whatever is the property that, the name of the property that we are supplying to this function, we are just trying to get that property value over here in the line number 4. And once the property is retrieved from HCI, we just map it with default and pass it on to the target field. So we just pass a constant, something like p underscore ethnicity. Once the ethnicity has been returned from whatever is the value that we stored earlier, we just map it to the target. So these kind of functionalities are possible. You can even have different kind of transformations like string concatenation, any kind of functionalities that we would like to implement using JavaScripting. So that is possible over here. Similarly, apart from that, we have a lot of standard functions which are on the same lines as the PI system. So we have date related, node related, some of the constants, texts, conversions. This is the fixed values that I was talking about. Instead of value mapping, we have made use of fixed values in most of the cases. Then you can even use a value map. Under this, you can have the sender and the receiver party, and what are the identifiers, and what is the context of the value mapping. So this is more on the PI lines. It still has the namespace, which reflects correctly that it is borrowed from XI. And we can use a default value and things like those. So the value mapping, as I mentioned, we can make use of it until unless we are not, we are sure that it would be used across iFlows. Otherwise, you can go ahead and make use of fixed values, which gives you a very simple lookup wherein a key could be passed inside and a value would be returned against it. Then you also have Boolean kind of functions like if then else and if else conditions. Then you have statistics and arithmetic functions, which are available as standard templates. Otherwise, you can build your custom functions in case if none of these suffice to your needs. Once the mapping has completed, after the mapping, we are just going ahead and removing the namespaces again, if any. And after removing the namespaces, since there is a record level condition that we had supplied in this mapping, so it may or may not create a root node. Okay. And so it may or may not create a root node. So we have a content modifier which adds a root node on top of the body. So in case if there is no body coming in, still we have a root node on top of it, so that we can at least try and gather it at the very end. Because when you are in these kind of functionalities, whenever you are gathering the response, you need to have some kind of an XPath to gather all of these. So that being said, once we gather, we just simply convert the XML to CSV based on the path to source element, and we provide the file separator, and that's it. You can supply a header using the content modifier. Here we are supplying the header based on the field values which are required and passing the body below it. So this is again one of the examples of making use of a content modifier whenever you want to manipulate the body which we want to send to the target. And you can, at the very end, you can either send it through an email or you can send it directly onto the SFTP server so that it can just work. Okay. Any questions on this flow, or any general questions that you might have on the overall functionality?
Yes, Aditya, it is 11:45 now. I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are left with how many in the agenda, or have we like completed everything, or we just spill over like tomorrow?
Agenda will go on.
Yep. Actually, I mean, as of now, we are good. So we, Agni, we do not have anything else to cover, but just the connectivity. So for the connectivity, I have explained the basic steps, but I'm not sure whether we would be able to do an end-to-end scenario on these cases, like the PSC setup or the EC payroll or ERP server setups. So those kind of things are very specific to the scenarios that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And but anyway, the connectivity from SOAP UI to our HCI system is working, as I shared the details yesterday. So I think we should be good on that part.
Okay.
So Aditya, so what we will do, what we will cover tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow, in case if there are any other scenarios that you would like to discuss, I can discuss on those, or any generic HCI questions. Or if I find anything which is, because I'll be attending the session for SAP Ticket tomorrow as well. So if I have anything, maybe I can share those experiences. In case if
Okay. So
do
do that. Bakav, also please email Agni if you want to cover anything tomorrow. Okay. Srikant, Bakav, Ramesh, Praveen.
So, and also, Raidu, we can cover the externalized parameters.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I think that's very, very important. We need to see that.
Absolutely, we can do that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, Aditya. Thank you so much. I think you need to. I know it was a busy day for you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
right.
Good
I'm almost
presentation.
half asleep. I mean, it's like I've been awake from 5 a.m. and a person like me who doesn't usually miss on my sleep, it's hell of a day.
Thank you so very much, Aditya. Very good job.
Thanks a lot, Bakao.
Yeah.
Thank you. And tomorrow,
Thanks,
maybe we
Aditya.
can discuss more into our business aspects. Maybe we can pick up some generic examples, because that might help the other listeners as well.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because I see Jonathan, Patricia joining, Chad, Deepa. So those are all functional consultants. From the business perspective, you walk them through a little bit, it will be beneficial for everyone.
Absolutely, Raidu. I do agree. I mean, the more we discuss, maybe other people might have their doubts clarified, or they might have a few further questions on that kind of a scenario. So we
Correct.
can definitely cover that up.
Done. Thank you so much, Aditya. Thank
Thank you,
you,
Aditya.
everyone.
Thank you.
Aditya, just one last minute.
Yes, Deepa. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Last question.
Yeah, no. I'm not going to ask you. I'm not expecting an answer now. But tomorrow can we cover something like what are the key differences between OData and SF API? The data basically. You remember, we saw some OData queries giving us
Sure.
codes. Some of them giving option IDs.
Yep.
You understand, right?
Yeah.
So can you just highlight on the key differences that you see between OData and SF API and what we should be concerned and aware of?
Sure.
Okay.
I can do that.
Thanks, Aditya.
Okay. So we end the session here today and see you all tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye.